Today on Locked On Canadiens, Kent Hughes claims he doesn't need to trade the Carey Price contract, but I know he's lying.
You are Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Locked On Canadiens. We want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. As you know, we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube, as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you get your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. My name is Laura Saba, also known as the Active Stick, and I am overjoyed to announce that my wonderful co-host is back. Ian Boisvert, also known as Maybe It's Ian. I know you guys have missed him as much as I have. Ian, I'm so sorry. I know you're not fully 100% yet, but you are pulling a Patrick Laine right now.
Yeah, let's elephant out of the room. I sound awful. I can promise you I sound way worse than I actually feel. Still feel pretty crummy, but we're okay. We'll be all right. Appreciate Laura holding down the fort when I went to Arizona and came home with nothing but a respiratory infection of some kind. So glad to be back. Very much feel like I'm pulling a Patrick Laine in that I'm sure some people are we're thinking, why is this guy not on the show? It's just because he's got the sniffles, just like they were when Laine got the flu. But yeah, we're back. We're still you know, it's funny, we planned for that Kent Hughes eventual trade. We were like, we're gonna rig the system here. We're not gonna record, and we're gonna record on September 1st because that's when he's gonna trade Carey Price's contract. We're geniuses. Look how smart we are, and that has not worked out at all, huh, Laura?
Kent always wins. He always wins.
The house always wins.
The house always wins. So I have to really quickly talk about a couple of things. First of all, I do want to apologize to everybody because I swear I'm not a boomer, but I engaged in some boomer behavior last week. I was looking for the golf tournament announcement of when the Canadiens golf tournament was going to be, and I talked about it multiple times on the podcast, and I had set my Google results to English only for whatever reason. I can't remember. I think I was just trying to translate something, or sometimes weird results come up. So I'd set my results to English only. So the Canadian press, or in French, had an article saying that the tournament is on September 15th. And the I think it's the same place that they always do the like Laval sur le Lac, like the golf place there. So anyway, so that is when it is. And I do want to thank our wonderful listener, who I'm naming the official informant of this show right now, for sending it on Instagram. But speaking of Instagram, this is another boomer thing. So for whatever reason, I did not get notifications, and I did not think to go check. And so he had sent it multiple times, and I missed it multiple times. Anyways, so that's what we know, and I have to remember my Google settings. But also real quick, an apology to a bunch of people on Instagram who got messages from me today. For whatever reason, there were a bunch of messages from last year that were hidden until today. I always check the message requests. I always check the hidden requests. I always filter out, any of that spam and things like that. For whatever reason, I only got those messages today. I do believe, though, every one of the people that I saw today, they had private Instagram, so maybe it's a new setting. I just want to say thank you so much for still listening, all of you guys. And I also really want to say as well, it's Mark Zuckerberg that is trying to keep our listeners away from us. It is not us. But I promise you, I will be much more diligent with that in the future. All right, let's get to Kent Hughes. And today, he claimed that he doesn't need to trade the Carey Price contract. Now, I think he's lying.
Yeah, so this comes to us from Eric Engels. He sat down with Kent Hughes for an article for Sportsnet. The direct quote here is, "We're fine. We don't have to trade Carey Price. If we can find a trade to move his contract that makes sense for us and makes sense for another team, we'll pursue it, but we don't have to." This sounds familiar, Laura, and it sounds familiar because Kent Hughes says this a lot. I have two instances of this happening in the past. If the right deal is there, we'll do it. We're not going to trade him if we don't believe the deal is the right deal. Who did he say that about?
Every other guy.
That was, yes, but that was Ben Sherratt. That was the Ben Schrott trade. That he was lying through his teeth. He was an expiring contract. You were the worst team in the league. You absolutely needed to trade that guy. So don't lie to us, Kent. We know you did. And then I spoke with Jeff, so that gave it away. And he was thankful. That doesn't mean we're going to do things that are against our best interest. That was on the Too Serious trade where they traded Jeff Petrie for the second time. I also think that this is just posturing to a certain extent. Like, I think, is there a way the Canadiens can get cap compliant without that? Yeah. But what do they want to do? Right?
So,
What's the easiest way for them to do it right now? It's to move the dead money contract. Like
yes.
No, they don't have to do that. They could do a lot of really dumb ideas, but this is the easiest way to accomplish that goal.
We do need to say, though, the GMs got together and decided that the CBA stuff that was going to come into effect next year, some of it is coming into effect this year, which adversely affects the Habs because they can't just paper down to Laval anymore.
Right. Which is, to me, a very Mickey Mouse thing for this league to do. Like,
Par for the course.
It's September. We are going to see exhibition games this month, and you've decided that a rule is kicking in now. That's crazy. Like, and maybe I can imagine that like the teams had some wider knowledge of this happening, but the optics of it being announced in early September is crazy. It just should not. That's not something professionals do. It's like, oh, by the way, here's a new rule. Season starts next month. Good luck. Like that's not how I did my fantasy football draft over the weekend, and my commissioner, who I love dearly, walked on a rule that he wanted to change at the draft, and we were all amenable to it. At least it was before we started the season. But like, dang, you can't be doing that. Anyway, I find that aspect of this to be very frustrating. They're like, what were the Canadiens supposed to do now?
Well, they have to trade the contract or get rid of a guy. And honestly, like the guy that everyone's thinking of is probably Mike Matheson. The guy that's probably going to go if they do that is probably Josh Anderson.
Really? Do you think the Canadiens get anything of value if they're moving Josh Anderson out, or they just have to eat the cap relief?
That's the problem, I think, is that they right now need Mike Matheson. They do. I don't care who's ready to make the NHL. Don't send me names. Because the Canadiens need Mike Matheson at the start of the season. Right. 2 months in, 3 months in, trade deadline, they might not, right?
Different story.
We know that they're probably parting ways at the end of the season, right? But right now, to start the season, like today's not the day. Today's not the day that they're going to be trading Mike Matheson unless they get value, because that's the calculation they're going to make in their mind. If we trade Josh Anderson today, or if we trade him in March or February, whenever the deadline is, we're going to get the same kind of return. But if we trade Mike Matheson today, or we trade him closer to the trade deadline, that's when we're going to get a better return for him.
Yeah.
Right?
I think a lot of what the Canadiens front office have done in their public speaking since the season ended is all in service of sort of buying themselves time, whether it's buying Kirby Dach time to get healthy. Hey, he might not be ready in time. We need to be patient. Or to buy themselves time and to say like, hey, we can move Carey Price's contract. We don't have to. It'd be nice. Like, I think that all this is doing is sort of laying the groundwork for them to take their time with this. Now, you mentioned the golf tournament, right? The artificial beginning of the Canadian season. If you remember, was it last season or the season before where Casey DeSmith was there because he was a Montreal Canadian for like 30 seconds? I would like to think that they would want everybody involved in that, right? That they would want, whoever is coming, if they're going to then turn around and use this cap space to make another deal, which has been rumored by, I think, Marco D'Amico has said that's something the Canadiens might want to do. Like they're going to want that guy to come in and be part of training camp, right? They're not going to want this to drag on super long.
Right. And the fact that they do have a little bit of time, it doesn't necessarily mean that they will take all of that time, right? Like there's the official deadline where they got to be cap compliant. And then there's like their artificial deadline, which is way before that. So the thing that I do want to kind of emphasize, though, is that I think the thing that they would prefer to do is to trade that Carey Price contract. I think that they don't want to have any more holes in their roster right now, because for better or worse, both Mike Matheson and Josh Anderson are known quantities for the Montreal Canadiens. They are guys that are heavily relied on. And until somebody actually legitimately emerges, they need those guys. So it just feels to me that either way, like the return on Mike Matheson would be much higher closer to the deadline. And that's the calculation that they're going to be making when they, when they make these decisions. All right, up next, one of the sweeteners that could be thrown into the deal could be, according to some rumor mongers, not according to Locked On Canadiens, this is not the official position, is Joshua Roy. But Joshua Roy has come back to Montreal with a new lease on life and has done a lot of work in the offseason. So we are going to talk about that coming right up next. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet. Player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little bit more energy to your Sundays. So, are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, let's talk about Joshua Roy. This podcast is on the record as being somewhat disappointed in him last year. He was quite inconsistent, and in the early stages of the season, including the preseason, he seemed checked out. He seemed not ready to grab the bull by the horns. Now, whether it is a conversation that the organization had with him, whether it is the criticism from the media, because there was a lot of it, whether it was just some sort of, realization in himself that he needs to do better, Joshua Roy has worked his butt off this offseason, and he has come in saying a lot of the right things.
Yeah, and he spoke with TVA. This was translated from French into English. So this first line is going to sound especially funny coming from somebody like me who sounds like he died 3 days ago. I've never been in such good shape. I'm a lot faster. I feel it every time I jump on the ice and at the gym. I feel leaner, faster. It's going to change my game. Skeptic point of view, right? I'm going to go from that aspect of this. Was any of that wrong with his game last year? Like
his conditioning?
Maybe conditioning. Maybe that's part of it, right? But like I never watched Joshua Roy last year and went, it's the speed. The speed isn't there.
Yeah.
Like it was all of it. It was every part of his game that was just like it just didn't work.
It was the compete level, to use a Jeff Gorton favorite term.
Yeah.
It was the compete that was missing from Joshua Roy, right? There was a little bit of I don't want to say entitlement that we saw in his game, but just kind of like we felt like, okay, he thought that, okay, I've made it. There's not work left to do. Yeah, he took it for granted, right? There's not a lot of work left to do. So for him saying that, I think it does give him a little bit of an out. Like if he performs better this year, he can say it's because of the work he did in the offseason without having to admit that he was checked out or that he was entitled or that he took it for granted or that he didn't have enough motivation or that he didn't have the desire, the drive, any of that, right? He doesn't have to make those admissions if he says, well, I worked on my body, right? I did drills, I worked on my speed, I worked on my game, whatever. I worked on physical, tangible aspects of his game as opposed to the mental aspect of it, which is really what we were all kind of criticizing, right? Like nobody showed up and said, okay, he sucks now. We said he's inconsistent and he has the ability to do these things that he's simply not doing on the ice.
Yeah, and we got to see a lot of him in the AHL last year. I got 2 in-person viewings of him in Hartford. We watched all of the playoffs as well. So like we could see it. We could see moments where Joshua Roy was him, where he was that guy who could go in and could turn a game around on his own. Yeah. But they were flashes. It wasn't a consistent thing. And he's a 5th round pick. Like the expectation that he is going to be that kind of player all the time at the NHL level is not true. But like, can you get a second, third line scoring option out of Joshua Waugh at some point in his NHL career? And occasionally he goes on like a month-long tear where he just can't be stopped. Like that to me seems the higher end of his, his value in the National Hockey League. I do find it funny that like, Patrick Laine, we talked about how, a lot of people thought that his work ethic was bad, which is just not true. And then he spent all summer on the ice and we saw him on the ice all the time. And now, everybody's coming back to Montreal and coming back to Brassard, and Joshua is like, hey, don't forget about me. I've also been putting in that work. Look, I'll show you this fall. I think that's important because I think it shows that all of these guys are driving each other to be better, which is not like, it's something that all athletes say about their teammates all the time, but it's the first time since I've really been watching this team where it's been tangibly true. Where like I saw a meme posted on the Habs subreddit of I believe it was Tom Cruise running somewhere in Mission Impossible, and it was Lane Hudson when he sees Ivan Demidov is back on the ice for the second time today. Like that's the fact that that's like the mentality around how these guys are preparing for this season.
Mm-hmm.
That hasn't, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, like that hasn't been true my entire life watching this team. Like
no, you're right.
That these guys are dragging each other to the rink every day just out of like, I want to be better than everybody.
Right. It's not just that. It's that they love seeing each other, right? Like it's a healthy competition.
Yeah.
My favorite meme is like it's a picture of Ivan Demidov and Lane Hudson in a car. And it's Lane Hudson and Ivan Demidov going to work at the Bell Center from their home at the Brassard practice center. That is my favorite meme. It is these guys, right? And yes, there's a couple of things, right? With Lane Hudson, both Lane Hudson and Ivan Demidov, a lot of the talk about them has always been that they're like this, right? They're obsessed with being better. They're huge nerds about their own game. All they want to do is play hockey, right? Like all they want to do is talk hockey, play hockey, eat, sleep, breathe hockey. Yes, there is that, but there's like a guy who's not even an NHL player anymore is showing up to these practices, these unofficial practices that, so that's David Savard, by the way, which we'll get into in a second. But I think that, but it's healthy because all of these guys know that this is how they're going to win, right? Yeah. It's, because Lane Hudson is not trying to win a spot from Ivan Demidov. And I would even go as far as to argue, things like even Patrick Laine is not fighting for a spot. Technically, on an existential level, yes, he is. But for an opening night lineup for the first couple of months of the season, Patrick Laine is not fighting to win a spot.
No,
he's
but
showing up to
who
work.
is Joshua Waugh? He's fighting for a spot, right? Like you look down the lineup, and you're thinking Sammy Blais is going to try to make this team out of camp. Joe Veleno.
All the prospects we're excited about.
Oliver Kapanen is going to be trying to fight to make that roster. There's going to be a lot of competition further down the lineup. Now, can Waugh fill those, the roles that were left behind by the Heinemans and the Armias? Probably not. But can he bring something else, right? Like, can he's going to have to come into camp and prove that he is an offensive option, because he's not going to be able. I don't think he has that defensive acumen to his game, but we know the offense can be there if he can show up and be that. And maybe that's why he's focusing on this, right? If he can show up and be that burner and go north south really fast with the puck and be an offensive dynamic threat, that's his ticket to getting on this team. Even if they're playing you on like a third line and you're playing with Jake Evans and Bolduc, that's a fun line. I could get behind that line getting 12 minutes a night, right?
Yes. Or Alex Benberg from San Jose, which is the latest. I think that this was a rumor monger. I don't think it was an actual reporter that said that.
I'm not putting the hat on.
No. This is not a hat day. It's really not a hat day. However, I do think that Joshua Waugh, even if he doesn't win a spot on this team, I think that this is his ticket to an NHL team.
Yeah.
Right? I think, and then that helps the team overall in general. Him working hard does not just help his own future, it helps the Habs. They get more of a return for him, right? Yep. So, we'll see. Or he's more of a sweetener in a deal. We actually had a question about something to do with trying to get Tage Thompson and what kind of package you would put together. A Joshua Waugh is not going to do it, but a Joshua Waugh could be a hell of a sweetener, in November or something like that. So
Mhm.
we're going to obviously keep following his trajectory, and we're really, really hoping that he puts his money where his mouth is and he is really back to prove something. In the meantime, we're doing a series suggested by one of our good friends. It is how do the Canadiens stack up against the rest of their division? And I deliberately left the Toronto Maple Leafs for today so that my co-host could enjoy this comparison as well. And that's coming up in just a moment here on Locked On Canadiens. This episode is also brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives, and if you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. It does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes. You can see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. For me, the thing that I was most surprised about is all of my miscellaneous spending. I was doing way more of it than I thought, and I would not have been able to see that if Monarch had not been doing all that tracking and categorizing it for me. So don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. And I want to emphasize you got to do this in the browser to take advantage of that. All right. It's time for another side-by-side comparison. I do really quickly also want to remind everyone that tomorrow's our mailbag episode. You can send us mailbag questions at lockedoncanadiens@gmail.com. You can send them to us on TikTok at Locked On Canadiens, on Blue Sky at Locked On Canadiens. If you know us personally, you can send us a text. And also on Instagram, whatever happened, whatever glitch that happened that like ate all your messages, they were in the upside down or whatever, I can now see them. So please send them to us on Instagram as well. I promise you, I will keep scouring until I get every single one of the letters that you send us. All right, let's talk about how the Canadiens stack up against the division. So earlier this week, I did what I thought were the top two teams in Tampa Bay and Florida. And I want to shout out Jacques Facepunch because he gave us this idea. Really, really like this idea. I do think that he borrowed it from, I want to say, Locked On Sabres. But either way, I very deliberately chose Tampa and Florida as the top two teams in this division. Not by standings, just by quality. Ian, real quick before we get into Toronto, do you agree or disagree with my choice?
Yeah, I think if we're going from a regular season standpoint, like they're 1A, 1B. Playoffs are a different story because Florida has proven that they don't really need to be the best team in the league when they get to the playoffs because they just flip the switch and they become the Florida Panthers again. So I have no complaints with you could put either of them 1A, 1B in this division for the regular season, and I'd buy it.
So why did I put Toronto third is because I think not just have they've lost a lot in Mitch Marner, which we talk about regular season versus playoff. I think that's a huge hole that people were so happy. People in that market were so happy to see him go, and I guess people in other markets were happy to see Toronto without him. That nobody stopped to think about like what happens without a guy who can perform at that level. Perennial Selkie candidate, multiple 100-point seasons, right?
Yeah, I know a lot of Leaf folks and fans and media like to talk about addition by subtraction because he was so bad for the room. He wasn't bad for the room. They loved having him there in Toronto. Like that's all fabricated. The part I want to focus on here is the subtraction. That's 100 points gone. That's 100 points that Bobby McMahon isn't going to get. Like, I have a hard time looking at this and going, Nick, this is finally the season that Nicholas Robertson pops off. Like, this is going to be a big step back for them. And I don't think people are really fully understanding what that's going to look like because Marner did play he was obviously a huge part of their offense, especially this last season when Matthews got hurt and he's been dealing with a lot of wrist problems. Like I'm worried that, that might be something he has to deal with for the rest of his career. And if he's, if he's out for any extended period of time, your best player is now William Nylander, who's fantastic, by the way. But then it's a massive drop off. Like it's like Nylander, Nyes. How many more seasons like this are we getting out of Tavares? Gap, like chasm. So I find that yeah, exactly. I think what's funny is that I think the same things you could say about the Canadiens and Leafs from like 2021 when they met in the playoffs are still kind of true now. Like the Matthews top end talent of the Toronto Maple Leafs, Matthews is a more elite player than anyone the Canadiens have right now. That might not always be true, but it's true right now. But I'll take the Canadiens' depth any day of the week. Like what they are building is just, I feel safer looking at their lineup and going, okay, if this happens, I know I have these guys. Like they're like a couple injuries away from being like maybe one injury away from it being like, well, season's over.
Yeah.
Like yes, you could say that about a lot of players, but it's true.
And that's really the argument that I want to make, because when I first started doing this, when I was doing the comparisons, I started doing all the underlying numbers, and the Canadiens' underlying numbers were terrible. Like I kind of got sick of looking at like other team being like top whatever, and then the Canadiens being like number 28 or whatever. So like I think it's most pronounced against Toronto because they are so top heavy, because their regular season was so strong. It's most pronounced. So like when you make comparisons like that, objectively, if you're comparing last year to this year, yes, Toronto like does seem to have the edge in a lot of ways, right? Particularly with goaltenders that had great regular seasons, that too as well, right? So you have to kind of look at consistency and depth. Whereas I feel like with Samuel Montembeault, there's a known quantity there, and there's a level of consistency that he is able to maintain. Now, I know we talked a lot last year about him being like, making like allowing one terrible goal, and then like making incredible saves and things like that. But there's a baseline for Samuel Montembeault that this team can expect, right?
Yep.
And it's pretty good, right? It's not bad. Whereas like with Toronto, it's like, well, is, Solars or whatever, or Jacob Wall or whatever going to have an amazing season, or is it going to be like a flash in the pan or what, right? So I'm not super convinced on that. But it's also just the depth, because we always say on this podcast, and I believe it to be true, like no truly good team is an injury away from playoffs versus non-playoffs, is an injury away from like having your entire season collapse, right? Yeah. And one guy out of those guys being down, like it would really, really hurt the Toronto Maple Leafs. So Montreal, honestly, like I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, Montreal is so much better than Toronto now. I don't think that that's objectively true, but I think that the Canadiens have a depth that will be able to put together a more convincing season than the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, I think I have a more interesting question. Who's better this season, Toronto or Ottawa?
That's a great question, because we are going to cover Ottawa tomorrow, or next week. We're going to do the rest of this next week because tomorrow's the mailbag.
Right, and we'll compare Ottawa to Montreal, but I'm kind of curious because we saw them up close and personal in that first round playoff series between those two. They're always going to be compared because one looks like in Ottawa they're on the upswing. Finally, they're doing it. Toronto looks like they're going to take a step back, hopefully to take a step forward. I think they're really hoping that McDavid just decides he wants to go to Toronto, but like I just can't imagine that's happening. I also can't imagine that you prepare for that, because then if he doesn't, you've got all this money and nobody to spend it on. And you're still Toronto, who I don't know if you followed anything of what Mitch Marner has been saying in the media recently, but it seems like a brutal, terrible place to play through his perspective. Anyway, I kind of think Toronto still holds that mantle for right now, but like the first couple games between those two this season could really flip that for me.
I think so. Or maybe just the first 10 games each team has.
Yeah.
That could also like be a good weather vane. All right. So we don't have trivia currently. Trivia is on hiatus. I think we both proved that we have to go to podcast training camp next week. So it will be back.
Does that mean we have a podcast golf tournament too? That kicks off podcast training week?
All right, listeners, you tell us what would be our equivalent of a golf tournament. I think I also need like social media training camp. I promise you guys I will not neglect you ever again. I really do think it's a setting because,
Yeah.
there's no way that they were gone for an entire year, those messages, and I didn't see them. So Facebook updated its privacy settings for some reason. Anyway, all this to say, please send us mailbag questions. You can send them to us in the YouTube comments. You can send them to us via email at lockedoncanadians@gmail.com. You can hit us up on Blue Sky, Locked On Canadians. You can hit us up on TikTok, Locked On Canadians, and also on Instagram, Locked On Canadians. I hope they all get to us. In the meantime, I just mentioned all the places you can find us. I also would like to invite you all to subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. We're free and available, and we're going up to 5 days a week next week. You'll find me all over social media at The Active Stick. You'll find my co-host at Maybe It's Ian. We're going to thank you all so much for listening, and we will talk to you all tomorrow.